15 years from now, could someone potentially surpass the athletic prowess of Carlos Alcaraz, even at the absolute peak of his game? It's a question that, for one seasoned tennis expert, seems almost unfathomable, and their recent pronouncement feels less like a comforting reassurance and more like a stark premonition for the young star. Carlos Alcaraz remains conspicuously absent from the Montreal draw, even as his name quietly reappears on the entry list for Cincinnati. Yet what has finally been disclosed isn't a soothing update on his physical state. Instead, it peels back layers to expose a more unsettling query concerning the future, specifically ahead of Montreal 2026. Richard Krajicek, a former Wimbledon champion, holds a firm belief that Alcaraz will indeed return to the court, a statement that initially offers solace until he begins to articulate the inherent complications. Wrist injuries possess an insidious nature, often presenting flawlessly during controlled practice sessions, only to flare up and react adversely when subjected to the full crucible of match play. The brutal speed, the unexpected, awkward contact, and the grueling endurance demanded by extended contests. Genuine progress can certainly occur, but it doesn't automatically equate to complete healing. Montreal has already slipped away from his calendar, leaving Cincinnati as the sole stage for his much-anticipated comeback. This single tournament is now burdened with the immense task of restoring Alcaraz's precise timing, his wavering confidence, and his essential trust in his own body before the pressures of the US Open descend upon him. The initial damage to his wrist unfolded in Barcelona, where, despite requiring on-court treatment, he courageously completed his match, only to withdraw the following morning, signaling a more serious underlying issue. Madrid then vanished from his schedule, followed by Rome, and eventually, the hallowed grounds of Roland Garros, Queens, and Wimbledon all disappeared from his competitive calendar. For those seeking tennis narratives that delve deeper than the polished official announcements, uncovering the buried truths, the true focal point is no longer merely whether Alcaraz can stage a return, but rather if the version of him that does return will be capable of withstanding the very first instance his wrist is compelled to prove its resilience under the relentless scrutiny and brutal pressure of Grand Slam competition. That ultimate validation will undeniably not transpire in Montreal, as the decision regarding his participation there has already been definitively settled. Tournament director Valérie Tétrault publicly confirmed that Alcaraz would not be making the journey to Canada while his right wrist continued its recovery, and while her explanation carried an undertone of support, it also contained an unmistakable note of caution, emphasizing that the absolute priority was his full recovery to 100%, particularly given the notoriously tricky nature of wrist injuries. For legions of fans who held on to the desperate hope that Montreal might miraculously become the stage for a surprise return, that possibility has now been unequivocally shut down. Alcaraz remains tantalizingly close enough to competitive play for talk of a comeback to feel tangible and real, yet he is clearly not prepared to risk another strenuous test before Cincinnati. This subtle but crucial distinction holds significant weight, as a mere entry list can foster a sense of optimism and confidence, without providing any genuine medical certainty regarding an athlete's physical readiness. The organizers of the Cincinnati tournament have proudly declared the defending champion as a participant for the event, slated to run from August 13th through the 23rd, with Reuters reporting it as his targeted return following an extended absence that has stretched back to April. However, the simple act of appearing on an entry list offers no insight into how his wrist might react after a particularly demanding training session, nor can it possibly reveal whether he can unleash a late, blistering forehand without even a flicker of hesitation. While the announcement effectively provides Alcaraz with a tangible destination, his ongoing rehabilitation journey remains the sole determinant of whether he will actually arrive there in a truly competitive condition. Richard Krajicek's insightful assessment meticulously explains precisely why this comeback cannot be adequately judged through a handful of encouraging video clips alone. The former Wimbledon champion possesses first-hand experience with a similarly debilitating issue, having battled through a persistent elbow problem himself, and he vividly describes wrist and elbow injuries as significantly more challenging to manage because their recovery trajectory rarely follows a predictable, straightforward calendar. A typical hitting injury often behaves quite differently, allowing an athlete to gradually resume play, progressively increase the workload, meticulously monitor for any adverse reactions, and then make necessary adjustments. This painstaking process can unfold smoothly for days on end before sudden discomfort abruptly interrupts its momentum, forcing another setback. Krajicek was not, by any means, predicting an outright disaster. He made it abundantly clear that he fully expects Alcaraz to return to professional play and firmly believes the Spaniard is capable of recovering his complete pre-injury form. The truly uncomfortable aspect of his commentary concerned the uncertain timing of this recovery. He candidly admitted that he could not definitively say whether Alcaraz's peak level would resurface during the North American hardcourt swing or at a later point in the indoor season. His underlying confidence in the eventual positive outcome does not, however, erase the profound uncertainty that continues to shroud the immediate weeks ahead. This, then, is the truly honest injury update, carefully concealed beneath the veneer of hopeful headlines. Alcaraz's long-term future in tennis is not being questioned, but his immediate readiness to compete remains absolutely impossible to guarantee from outside his tightly guarded camp. Krajicek's perspective carries considerable weight not only because he triumphed at Wimbledon in 1996 and ascended to a career-high world number 4 ranking, but also because he personally endured a difficult arm injury, lending a powerful authenticity to his conclusions drawn from his own lived experience, though it's crucial to note that his insights do not represent Alcaraz's dedicated treatment team or any confidential medical knowledge. The pervasive silence surrounding the precise diagnosis only adds another layer of complexity to the situation. While Alcaraz has confirmed a right wrist injury, his team has notably not publicly released a detailed medical description of the ailment. Early reports hinted at inflammation around a tendon sheath, though this has never received official confirmation from his attending physicians. The currently available evidence contains no verified reports of a tendon tear or any announced surgical intervention, and his doctors have not issued any public declaration confirming complete healing. Presenting these unconfirmed claims as settled facts moves significantly beyond what is actually known. What can be traced with absolute certainty begins in Barcelona on April 14th. During the opening set of his match against Otto Virtanen, Alcaraz distinctly felt his wrist give way after executing a return. The discomfort steadily intensified as the match progressed, prompting him to call for a physio late in the set, yet he still managed to complete a commanding 6-4, 6-2 victory. The very next morning, however, the mood shifted dramatically. Subsequent tests revealed that the issue was far more serious than both Alcaraz and his team had initially anticipated. He promptly withdrew before his next scheduled match and publicly spoke about the crucial importance of listening to his body to ensure the problem would not detrimentally affect his long-term future. This carefully chosen language was particularly revealing. This was no longer a minor complaint that could be managed with tape, superficial treatment, and sheer determination. The primary concern had unequivocally shifted toward potential long-term consequences. Alcaraz departed Barcelona with the optimistic hope of a swift return, but his meticulously planned schedule began to unravel almost immediately. Madrid disappeared first. Later, at the prestigious Laureus World Sports Awards, Alcaraz was observed wearing a supportive brace on his injured wrist and openly admitted that another comprehensive examination was urgently needed. He steadfastly refused to offer any precise return date, and, more importantly, he eloquently articulated the guiding principle behind his cautious decision-making. Prioritizing a complete recovery, even if it meant returning later, far outweighed the risk of forcing a premature appearance. He also thoughtfully mentioned his strong desire for a long and sustainable career. These comments, delivered with a calm demeanor, nevertheless unequivocally revealed the gravity with which his camp viewed the potential risks involved. Further test results ultimately brought his clay season to an abrupt end. Rome was subsequently removed from his competitive plan, and Roland Garros followed suit, tragically costing Alcaraz the opportunity to defend the title he had so brilliantly won in each of the 2 preceding seasons. That withdrawal carried an enormous competitive weight, particularly given his stellar start to 2026, which had seen him clinch the Australian Open and complete a career Grand Slam at an historically young age. His remarkable record stood at 22 wins and 3 losses when the injury cruelly sidelined him. Instead of arriving in Paris as one of the undeniable central favorites, he was relegated to watching the tournament unfold from outside the competitive draw. The grass season then emerged as the next potential window for his return, which only served to escalate expectations. Queens, a familiar preparatory route, offered a glimmer of hope. However, on May 19th, he definitively put an end to both possibilities. While his recovery was progressing well and he felt significantly better, he stated he was still not ready to compete. The careful wording was critical. Clear improvement had occurred, but competitive readiness remained frustratingly beyond his grasp. This persistent gap between feeling better and being ready is precisely where the current suspense and uncertainty reside. Rehabilitation offers a degree of control. Practice sessions can be judiciously shortened when signs of fatigue emerge, and coaches can meticulously dictate the pace, spin, location, and intensity of every single ball. A tournament, by contrast, ruthlessly strips away all such protections. Opponents mercilessly exploit weaknesses without a shred of sympathy. Returns arrive at awkward, uncomfortable heights, and defensive points force players into improvised, often high-risk contact. Adrenaline, a powerful force, frequently encourages a player to hit with even greater force than initially planned. The injured wrist must therefore demonstrate its ability to survive situations that simply cannot be perfectly replicated in a managed, controlled training session. Footage from late June showed Alcaraz tentatively hitting gently with his right hand once more, images that were genuinely encouraging, particularly as he had previously resorted to training with his left hand to safeguard the injured side. By early July, subsequent updates suggested that his recovery work was indeed progressing in the correct direction, representing genuine, tangible steps forward after months of competitive inactivity. Still, the inherent limitations of such updates were glaringly obvious. Short video clips can reveal movement and technique, but they offer no insight into the body's response several hours later, or the precise condition of the joint the very next morning. This is precisely why Krajicek's measured, step-by-step warning lands with such profound force. The greatest danger may not manifest itself during the initial clean hitting session, but could rather surface insidiously as the overall workload gradually increases across several consecutive days. Tennis players are fundamentally dependent on repetition, a truth that becomes even more critical when preparing for the unforgiving hard courts. Thousands upon thousands of contacts are necessary to build and refine timing. Serving introduces another distinct chain of forceful impact through the entire arm, and return practice can prove particularly demanding, as the player is constantly absorbing and redirecting raw pace rather than always generating every shot under ideal balance and court positioning. Alcaraz requires an extensive volume of practice to compete freely and without inhibition, but the path toward achieving that necessary volume absolutely cannot be rushed. Montreal would have undoubtedly provided an immensely important checkpoint. The event runs from August 1st through the 13th, offering top players a major competitive stage just before Cincinnati. Missing it deprives Alcaraz of crucial match exposure, valuable ranking opportunities, and vital information that simply cannot be replicated through training alone. Yet, entering the tournament prematurely could have created a far greater problem. A significant setback in Canada might have irrevocably destroyed his entire American swing. His continued absence, therefore, carries a dual meaning. The inherent risk associated with his wrist injury is still being treated with the utmost caution, and his team appears entirely unwilling to gamble with the US Open, merely to satisfy an earlier competitive deadline. Cincinnati now inherits every single unanswered question. Alcaraz is the defending champion there, having won the 2025 final when Jannik retired, and returning to this familiar territory provides him with both comfortable surroundings and a meaningful competitive target. However, it also creates immediate, intense pressure. Cameras will meticulously follow every single forehand he hits, commentators will closely scrutinize his racket speed, and opponents will strategically test his movement, particularly toward his injured side. Any visit from a trainer will instantly become breaking news within minutes. The very first match result may not provide a complete or definitive verdict. A victory could potentially mask subtle protective adjustments he's making for his wrist, while a defeat might merely reflect lost timing rather than a resurgence of pain. The most valuable information may very well emerge only after he has left the court. Can he practice normally the following day? Does his wrist tolerate another match soon afterward? Will his forehand maintain its aggressive intent even when fatigue inevitably alters his contact point? These nuanced details will ultimately matter far more than a single score line. His signature, high-octane playing style makes this comeback challenge especially delicate. Alcaraz does not construct his game around safe, economical patterns alone. He accelerates with sudden, explosive bursts, changes direction from incredibly difficult court positions, and transforms seemingly desperate defense into electrifying attack through sheer, explosive racket speed. Any reduction in commitment or power on his shots would impact far more than just raw pace. It could fundamentally alter his court positioning, shorten his attacking sequences, and crucially, afford elite opponents extra time to react. Even the slightest hint of doubt can profoundly disturb a player whose very best tennis hinges on instinctive, fearless aggression. The mental test, in fact, may arrive even before any physical failure. Once a joint has been the cause of months of absence, the player vividly remembers the precise movement or impact that initially triggered the problem. Alcaraz distinctly felt his wrist give way on a return in Barcelona, and Cincinnati will demand countless returns against some of the hardest serving players in the entire game. His body may be medically cleared, yet his mind can still hesitate for a fraction of a second, and at this elite level of tennis, that fleeting fraction often decides whether a return lands deep and dangerous or sits up invitingly for punishment. Krajicek's underlying optimism should not be dismissed or ignored. Alcaraz is still only 23 years old, possesses truly exceptional athletic resources, and is supported by a highly professional team meticulously managing his entire recovery process. This informed judgment prevents the unfolding story from devolving into reckless panic. Nothing currently verified suggests a career-threatening condition. The inherent drama stems instead from the compressed competitive schedule and the unpredictable nature of regaining competitive rhythm, not from unsupported claims about permanent, irreparable damage. Pressure will undoubtedly intensify at the US Open, where Alcaraz is expected to defend the crown he so famously won in 2025. Cincinnati concludes only days before the season's final Grand Slam. A deep run there would supply invaluable match play, but it would also compress his recovery time. Leaving the tournament early would protect his energy, though competitive repetition would remain frustratingly scarce. Another withdrawal would create the harshest possible path toward New York, where he would then arrive without having completed a single match since Barcelona. Every conceivable outcome carries a different, significant risk. Meanwhile, the professional tour has relentlessly continued its march without him. Jannik Sinner regained the coveted top ranking after defeating Alcaraz in the Monte Carlo final, then extended his dominance through the major events Alcaraz was forced to miss. Alexander Zverev triumphantly captured Roland Garros, and Sinner successfully defended his Wimbledon title. These outcomes matter immensely because Alcaraz will not be returning to a frozen, static rivalry. His leading opponents have accumulated matches, built confidence, and forged tactical momentum while he has been painstakingly rebuilding his wrist away from the cauldron of competition. This creates the genuine, underlying danger hidden behind the Montreal headline. Alcaraz doesn't merely require medical permission to simply hold a racket, he must re-enter a tour that is operating at full, blistering speed. Sinner will arrive with an established, formidable rhythm, and other contenders have spent months relentlessly testing themselves under intense pressure. Alcaraz must now discover his own current level in public, all while carrying the immense expectations attached to his already impressive 7 Grand Slam titles. His formidable reputation guarantees respect, but it cannot possibly replace the indispensable preparation that comes from match play. Fans should also carefully resist the temptation to treat Cincinnati participation as an absolute ironclad promise. While tournament organizers have indeed placed him in the field, and current reports describe the event as his intended return, players can and often do still withdraw when rehabilitation does not progress exactly as hoped. A cautious camp may very well wait until the final possible stage before committing without any reservation. This isn't necessarily evidence of some hidden disaster. It is simply normal, sensible prudence after a wrist problem has already erased clay, grass, and Montreal from his meticulously planned calendar. The next truly meaningful update will undoubtedly come through actions rather than dramatic medical language. Progress will become clearer once full-intensity training expands and once Alcaraz actually travels to Cincinnati. Practice sets against top-level opposition can help narrow the uncertainty before the fundamental comeback question finally reaches the match court. Even then, the larger mystery will undeniably persist until his wrist proves its ability to handle sustained high-level competition. This explains precisely why Krajicek's comments deserve careful attention without any undue exaggeration. His interview contained neither a secret scan nor a private, confidential diagnosis. Its profound value stemmed from eloquently describing the often overlooked reality that hopeful comeback headlines frequently obscure. A player can recover sufficiently to hit balls while still remaining a considerable distance from true match readiness. Full form may well return after the body is medically safe, but the competitive calendar cannot simply force those disparate stages to arrive in perfect synchronicity. Montreal, therefore, becomes important through its very absence, marking the tournament Alcaraz and his team were ultimately unwilling to use as an experimental testing ground. Their calculated strategic target lies squarely in Cincinnati, with New York then waiting as the ultimate unforgiving destination. Between these crucial waypoints sits an improving wrist, a champion burning with eagerness to return, and a challenging timeline offering precious little room for any further complications. The most honest conclusion, perhaps ironically, is also the most dramatic. Alcaraz appears to be steadily moving toward a return to competition, but absolutely nobody outside his immediate team can definitively confirm that the hardest part of his journey is truly over. Krajicek fully expects the complete player to return during the 2026 season, yet he cannot precisely identify the specific tournament where that transformative return will ultimately happen, since Cincinnati may indeed deliver it, or the event could equally reveal that recovery and genuine readiness are separated by significantly more distance than the initial entry list might suggest. Attention will undoubtedly follow his very first forehand, although his returns deserve even closer, more meticulous study. Alcaraz's willingness to attack without any visible protection of the joint will become a crucial, useful sign, especially when physical rallies push his contact point further behind him. The clearest, most unambiguous answer may ultimately arrive only after the match, when his dedicated team carefully decides what workload will come next. That critical decision will tell us unequivocally whether Cincinnati is successfully building momentum for the US Open, or if it is prematurely exposing a comeback that began before his wrist was truly ready for everything Alcaraz demands from it.